Hi, I didn't expect such a huge audience. Never mind. This will be short talk, maybe kind of more like meditation about editable web. What does it mean? The simple question for the start. How would you create a new web? As I expect all of you are developers. Who is not a developer? Raise your hands. Okay, developers here. You probably are familiar with the situation where your friend or someone from family will ask you, could you help me to create a website? And I don't know what is your attitude for that, but for me it's a constant source of confusion and trying to avoid writing any web because why? We have so many tools, such great tools, beautiful tools, but there are a lot of trade-offs. For example, WordPress. Once you will create WordPress, you need to maintain it somehow. Basically, the best what you can do is delegate that task to someone, some agency, because you as developer, what would you use for creating a website? Squarespace. It's nice for beginners, definitely, but it's not so cheap and it's closed source. So there is a limited amount of possibilities what you can do with that. Who doesn't know Gatsby? Raise your hands. Really? You don't know what Gatsby is? Gatsby is Jekyll. Do you know Jekyll? Site builder. So Gatsby is the React-based static site generator with huge popularity. Next.js, I believe everybody knows Next.js. Who doesn't know Next.js? So do your homework immediately after this talk. Google that because this is a conference about the React, and the Next.js is the best framework for React applications. I mentioned him with Gatsby because the Gatsby is static site generator. Next.js is for dynamic sites, but it can produce HTML and CSS as well. Okay, plain HTML, CSS, anyone? No. Why not? Of course, because we need to reuse structures and we need to maintain some organization of our websites. So this is just a list of tools. And are we there yet? Would you be willing to use these tools with peace of mind and being satisfied with that? I think we are not there yet. It's all about trade-offs, vendor lock or not. As I mentioned, the Squarespace or hosted WordPress, but even the open source software is dangerous too, because imagine you will create some website on Gatsby and maybe Gatsby will die, and what will be you doing in the next 3 or 5 years? The thing I want to highlight on this slide is that nowadays internet consists of millions of websites where is unknown author, creator, nobody knows what created that, and it looks like a huge cemetery. You know, it's very common, people asking me, hey, I need to update my website, and then I will take a look and I see CSS-less or something stylus or something old, evident technologies, a huge amount of abstractions, and I believe we have to fight with two evils, with the huge amounts of legacy frameworks, technologies, languages, and the world is still changing, surprisingly, so we possibly will have new deployment targets like WebAssembly, or mobiles are still evolving with all these touch interactions, and the huge competitor for webs are social networks, because nowadays the people are making content primarily on Facebooks, Instagrams, Twitters. And why? Because it's so easy to write status, but the web is somehow dying because it's not editable and maintainable enough as we would to have. So social networks are somehow the solution, but not without some sacrificing like things. For example, some bot can delete your content, or if you watch the Twitter scene, you can see there was a huge free speech purge. It means a lot of accounts was deleted accidentally, even the right and correct accounts. So how we can protect when we want to publish the content on the internet? We have to use own domain. But as I said, if I should create the web, I have a dozen technologies, and every technology is somehow with own trade-offs. So, okay, you will decide you will create your web, for example, with the Gatsby or Next.js or Play React, for example, and then what? You need to maintain design systems, and you choose from methodologies. And I believe design system and all these HTML and CSS coders methodologies should be possible to somehow algorithmify it. That's what I'm working right now. As I said, this talk is kind of the meditation about the new possibilities. I'm working on the proof of the concept that web is basically typed JSON. Why? It seems so weird. We have great languages like HTML, CSS, but the more abstract the language is, it's more easy to make some unnecessary wrong decision. And of course, the writing software is primarily only the developers as a developer's task. So it's not accessible for the regular people. I believe the 90% of static websites, and in the future these dynamic websites as well, I believe we can express them in one, I call it web language. And why we should do that? Imagine it would be possible to fork any website. Do you like this web? Okay, fork it. Do you need to update legacy web, as I said, which can be written in many dozens different, all forbidden technologies? I believe it should be possible to import existing website. By import, I mean to transfer it to typed JSON. Types are super important, and JSON is basically, why JSON? Because it's data, it's plain data structure, which is possible to store in any SQL database. Once we have typed JSONs, I believe we can express any website as a GraphQL endpoint. Why we should do that? Do you know GraphQL? Who do not know GraphQL? Raise your hands. Okay, great. GraphQL is, by my opinion, finally the common language to express APIs, and they sell it like the query engine, but for me, the GraphQL is the web language because it's typed JSON. And once we use with the plain data, no abstract syntax trees like HTML, no abstracted languages, but plain type data, we can redefine how the web should be stored as the data. Then we can have separate editor and separated renderer, as I said, but the heart, the core, is still GraphQL. Of course, it's not possible it's not possible to use that approach for everything, of course. But it's possible to use it for good enough amount of use cases. But we need some same restrictions. If you don't know RegNative, I believe you know the RegNative, there's some important, interesting thing about RegNative is they actually reimagined what the browser should look like. If you compare the CSS model of the browser and CSS model of the RegNative, you will see the people who design RegNative DOM and CSS model thought a lot about what should be the same restriction and what not. For example, in browser you can have text without the block. And it's hard for editor to handle this situation. In RegNative, it's impossible to use text without the blocks. Simple. Or in RegNative, all styles are actually JSONs. And if you deal with styles as a JSONs for you as a developer, you can make much accessible UI for that. And it's much easily to maintain than the style sheets written no matter in what CSS abstraction. Even the SAS is not ideal. The RegNative web, this thing, is the great library from Nicholas, who was recently hired to the Facebook team. He was the head of the Twitter mobile team. By the way, mobile Twitter is written in a RegNative web, so it's possible to use RegNative abstractions on the browser. And basically, that's way how we can prettify web. If you know prettifier tool for prettifying JavaScript, CSS, I believe we need to prettify how web is made. We had some idea about the semantic XML webs, but it was just dreaming 10 years ago, and where we are. Dozens of technologies, dozens of abstractions, but for me, as I said, the web should be a GraphQL endpoint. So this is the end of my short talk, and if you are interested in, because of course I have a reason why I'm talking about it, because I'm working on it, feel free to ask me later, or if you have a question, ask me right now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, do we have a question? We have a single question. So
who is asking? Yeah.
He's anonymous, he or she. All right, so when you are talking about websites, do you mean web apps as well?
Definitely, but those designing need to go in steps. So the first stage, first minimal viable product is static websites, and if I will manage to do that, I can move to the dynamic websites, because I believe the component is just the living static content. You know, I need to design the model for static content, and then if I will change the data for the dynamic content, it will be possible to use application as well. And by web application, I mean the RegNative application as well, because for me, it's not browser anymore. Browser with or WebAssembly will be just the container for the application. So yes, it's general word. Okay.